Veronica. Nice to meet you.
Hello.
Hi. Good to meet you.
Nice to see you. Nice to see you again.
Yep. Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome here such a distinguished group of panelists for our next panel. My name is Veronika Kukinova-Smigolova. I am a deputy minister at Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I hope I'll be able to lead those 5 ministers in this discussion. Our panel is called Secure Wider Europe, Vision for Success. And of course, it's all connected to Russian invasion of Ukraine, which clearly demonstrated the fact that Russia is an absolutely unreliable neighbor for Europe. Russia aims to create instability and insecurity and thrives on chaos and disinformation. So it's a key task for us, EU and NATO members, not only to help Ukraine to win the war, but also to strengthen and stabilize the wider neighborhood. Prosperous and stable countries around us don't necessarily have to become EU members or NATO members, but they should see the advantage of sharing European values and norms of behavior. Some of those countries, Ukraine at the first place, but also Moldova, were granted candidate status of the EU, but this isn't an immediate option for everybody. In this panel, we will examine the situation, priorities, and instruments available for us. And I would like to start and jump immediately into the questions. I would like to start with Minister Landsbergis, who is from a country not in a broader neighborhood of Russia, but in a direct neighborhood of both Russia and Belarus. So I would like to ask him which countries in the neighborhood, in the broader neighborhood, are most vulnerable, to which countries we should concentrate most, and what are the instruments available to us. Thank you.
Well, thank you, first of all, for allowing to speak in this distinguished panel. Also a very interesting subject that we've spent almost 1.5 days discussing among the ministers, most of the questions, and also the question that you've mentioned. Probably I would start that until the 24th of February, we've seen Eastern Partnership still as one unit. Maybe apart from Belarus, which was on a different plane, but nonetheless, the unit was clear. And we approach it as a unit, we deal with it as a unit, even though there are slight differences. The 24th changed some things, and then candidate status for 2 countries out of the Eastern Partnership changed a lot of things. So basically now we have, I would say, even 4 groups within the Eastern Partnership, and I think that the approach needs to be different to each and every group. Well, the first group, Ukraine and Moldova, is very clear. We need to help and assist any way we can for the countries to progress further down their candidate road. And it is very clear. You know, I come from the country that was helped down our road as a candidate country. Our Nordic friends, firstly, were always there when we needed assistance and guidance, legal advice or whatever. That was quite difficult for a country that was re-establishing itself after almost 60 years of occupation. So I think that this example could be used in Ukraine and Moldova. I will put aside everything that has to do with the war in Ukraine. Then there's a question of Georgia. And I think that we all want to see Georgia also receiving a candidate status. It's understandable, but I think it's fair to say that there are things, certain homeworks that need to happen in Tbilisi. but we cannot lose sight, we cannot stay idle and wait until they implement these things, because it's also, there are geopolitical tensions with each country, and if we're not active enough, then basically the geopolitical tensions could drag the country the other way. Then the other group is Armenia and Azerbaijan. And I think there are many things that we can do. There are many things that Europe has done already. But honestly, I very much value the effort by the Council President, Charles Michel, when it comes to the peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I think Europe has a role to play in the region. As a partner, as a friend in some cases, as a partner that is trusted by both sides, and we can definitely do more. Now, the most difficult question out of the Eastern Partnership is obviously the Belarus. After 2020, the stolen election, most of the opposition is either in jail or is out of the country. It's very difficult to operate within Belarus. Diplomatic activities are extremely limited because there are very few ambassadors left there, very few diplomats left. There are basically no NGOs left. So the country is fully isolated, almost fully isolated. It's extremely controlled by Russia and participant in war. So it's, one might say that it's a lost case. But on the other hand, I would like us not to forget the images of 2020 August. Hundreds of thousands of people waving white and red flags in the streets of Minsk and other cities. It's this incredible sight. And those people are still there. They're not in jail, and they have a sense of freedom, the quest for democracy in their heart and mind. So I think that we have to admit that Belarus can never be a lost case. We need to fight alongside the opposition who's still doing their job while staying in our countries, to help them reach out to those people who protested Lukashenko's regime, who are not supporting the war, and help them rise once more and rise up to the challenge to winning their country back from the regime that has it captured.
Thank you very much for a great summary, and I'd follow with a question to Minister Alvarez, directly connected to the one you just answered. There are other countries in our neighborhood, countries that do not feel threatened directly by Russia, but rather more by other issues like food insecurity, fertilizer shortage, and even don't see Russia necessarily as a main culprit in what's happening in this field. What would you suggest we do with those countries to keep them firmly on our side?
Definitely. That's a very big challenge that we are all facing. There are many countries around the world that they feel that they must not take sides because they consider that the blame is a little bit between two. They don't perceive the Russian threat as we do, or because they cannot afford to be aligned, because they are dependent on the Russian grain or on the Russian cooperation. So we really have to engage with them. First of all, to make a counter-narrative and to explain the truth of what's going on. Many countries still believe that our sanctions have an impact on the grain or on foodstuff, when it is very clearly stated that there is an exception for grain and for anything related to food in our sanction. Many countries continue to see this as just a territorial issue between Ukraine and Russia in which we are taking side. We must explain them that what's at stake here is either we go back to the past, to the sphere of influence, to the fences, the walls, very dark times for the world, or we go towards the future. The future is what European Union model is proposing: diversity, democracy, rule of law. And for all those countries that think that the price is too high to pay to speak up and to raise their voices, we must be there also to provide them with help. We must understand that for countries in the Maghreb, in the Sahel, in many parts of Asia, in many parts of Latin America, if we are not there to engage politically and to back them financially and concerning food security, they have no choice to do. So for me, the right mixture in order to tackle this very important issue is political dialogue and at the same time full financial support, especially concerning food security. There is one region that Spain knows very well, Latin America. In our next EU presidency, in 10 months from now, we want to re-engage them with Europe. It's probably the most Euro-compatible region in the world, but if we turn our back to them, they will turn their back to us in this specific issue.
Thank you very much. There is another aspect I would like to ask with Minister Aurescu, and this concerns the importance of transatlantic unity. Do you think that it is possible for EU and US to cooperate not only in security area, but let's say to divide labor in dealing with the neighborhoods to help them understand what's going on?
Well, I think it is very much possible, and I think one of the main effects of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, which was of course not wanted by President Putin, was more unity. Well, he thought that he could speculate our divides within the European Union, which was not the case. To the contrary, I think we showed much more unity than expected. And this is a good thing. And on the other hand, I think he also thought that he could speculate the divide between the two shores of the Atlantic. And it was not the case. To the contrary, the result was that we showed much more transatlantic unity. And the level of coordination, the level of contacts, the fact that we managed to adopt sanctions almost at the same time, at the same pace, of course, taking into account the specificities of each of the parties of the transatlantic link. This shows that we were able to act together in a very coordinated manner, and in a very efficient manner. And this coordination is going on as we speak. And of course, we can also deal together with the neighborhood. Because the attack of Russia against Ukraine was not just about Ukraine. It was an attack against the regional security. It was an attack against European security. It was an attack against transatlantic security. It was an attack against the fundamental parameters of the Euro-Atlantic security architecture. The fact that during the NATO summit in Madrid we were able to take so many important decisions, the new strategic concept, taking into account the reality changes on the ground. The fact that we managed to adopt very bold measures consolidating the deterrence and defense posture on the eastern flank. This is the result of the transatlantic coordination and cooperation. So yes, the answer is to the positive. I think we can cooperate together, and I think we are quite effective when we work together with the United States.
Thank you very much. My next question would be to Minister Stewart, and I would like to explore the idea of Russian defeat. is a defeat of Russia a precondition for securing wider Europe? How would that defeat look like? Is it necessarily a military defeat, or are there other ways we could arrange the situation around our borders without Russian defeat militarily? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. There can be absolutely no doubt that Russia must be defeated, and the war aims of the sovereign, independent, democratic nation of Ukraine must be fulfilled. Without that, look back at recent history, look back at longer history. How will we have peace in our neighborhood, in our part of the world? It's not possible. And Prime Minister Fiala in the earlier session set out quite rightly the fact that there's got to be the end to passivity. We've got to, this assumption, a Whiggish assumption that the world will just keep getting better and everyone we engage with will just move towards democratic norms is proving not to be the case. And so we've got to end passivity. And as President Zelensky said, Ukraine is the battlefield for freedom. It's not just the battlefield for European security, it's not just the battlefield for Ukraine, it's the battlefield for freedom. And you know, Francis Fukuyama, I completely agree with him. He said it is. Normally you always say it needs politics to bring a solution to this. Without politics we can't bring it to an end. In this case, and I entirely agree with him, it's war that is going to provide the solution there, and it is Russian defeat which is necessary and is going to happen. Picking up on Minister Kuleba's remarks, he said no time for half measures. We've got to get the military equipment, the training, and the finance all in place. We've got to make sure that ministers such as myself and my colleagues are not sitting here opining while there is a failure to get every piece of vital armament, multiple launch rocket systems and the like, in the hands of the Ukrainians now, as well as mobilizing the finances which are required, because they're running a very serious budget deficit, and the gap between the money which they require and the money which is coming in is large, and that's even if you take the promises as being concrete. And of course we've also seen rather slow dispensation of some of the funds that have been promised. Too big-headed to hold this. So it's so important that we do that. So we must win. And just a couple of remarks, if I may, just on the sort of broader question of securing wider Europe. There would be three key points I would pick up there. One would be strengthening our collective security through NATO. Our commitment in the UK is unwavering to NATO. It's the cornerstone of Euro-Atlantic security and is the foundation of our collective defence. So we've got to make sure that that stays in place. And as has been referred to already, the NATO Madrid summit was a significant step forward, a historic moment with a new strategic concept, and of course the invitation to Sweden and Finland to join the alliance as well. We've got to promote stability in the eastern neighbourhood and the Western Balkans, so important that we get momentum there. We need to end passivity there as well, as was suggested by Gabrielis. So that's a really important area. And the third kind of key pillar I'd look at is building our economic and security partnerships. We're working closely with allies to strengthen cooperation on technology, trade and security, drawing on our shared values to help promote democracy, prosperity and freedom, not just in Europe, but across the world. And I'll give an example. In 2019, the UK signed a strategic partnership and cooperation agreement with Georgia to ensure the continuation of free trade there. And we signed an equivalent agreement with Moldova. We all need to do more, and we need to do it now.
Thank you. Thank you very much. In the context of what you just said, I want to ask Minister Haavisto. Finland decided to join NATO. We are very happy to welcome you. It's a great news. Do you think that NATO enlargement should continue? That the solution to the problems would be also in NATO enlargement, through NATO enlargement, and should Ukraine eventually join if it wishes to join?
Thank you, Veronica. An excellent question. But let me start with a little bit wider perspective. I was one day thinking that since our government has been running now a little bit more than 3 years, what are the issues that we have done before applying a NATO membership? And actually, we were bringing our children back from Al-Hol camp from Syria. We were bringing our soldiers from Afghanistan. We were evacuating people due to the COVID crisis. We made Africa strategy, we made China strategy, and actually I just want to us to remind ourselves that we are speaking about the global security, and if there is no global security, there is no security even in Europe. I'm saying this because of the fact that we were hosting in Finland early June 20 African ministers, asking them why you are not on board on the Ukraine issue, why you don't condemn this violation of the UN Charter and all the key security principles. And actually even putting a little bit more pressure to people that, well, when you had a fight against apartheid and when you had a fight against the colonialism, we were with you. Why you are not with us in these special circumstances? And you get a lot of different answers from these ministers who basically it's a linkage to Russia, economic linkages to China, security linkages, certain support, and that just showed us how much more we have to do as Europe also when looking at this wider security. And then we have the new security topics like a climate issue and so forth, which we have to work systematically also globally with now COP27 is coming to Egypt and so forth. All these moments are extremely important for our own security as well. And then I'm coming to NATO and NATO enlargement. We Finns are very security-oriented people. You know, when we see a problem with the security, we immediately start to react. And so far, we have been relying on a system of the national defense and good cooperation with NATO and keeping this kind of in our pocket, probably self-created, what we call the NATO option. We were thinking that if security circumstances change in our neighborhood, we have always the possibility of applying NATO membership. And what could have a bigger change in the security environment than a Russian attack against the Ukraine war in Europe? So Finns actually moved extremely rapidly to a new position, and I'm so sorry to say to the Swedes, but we probably took the Swedes with us also in this new analysis. I got a little bit the feeling that if Finns are so concerned, Swedes should also be concerned about the current situation. Well, but I think it's a very good story. We are joining NATO, and then what would be the future of NATO enlargement? I don't want to speculate too much on which countries will be finally full members, but I think it's very important that that same option that we had actually to work very closely with NATO when we were not members, but having common exercises, take part to those issues that fit to your national security planning and so forth, you could cooperate with NATO. And then my final thing is we are now in the EU or have been just in an EU meeting. The very close cooperation with the EU and NATO is extremely important. And I think EU has done a lot now for Ukraine, for the solidarity to be on the front line on this issue. And I'm so proud of this EU unity on Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time for some more questions for another round. The topic that is very interesting is it's China and what China is doing in our region and how it is connected, how strongly it is connected to Russia. And basically, I would like to ask Minister Landsbergis if EU or Europe is able to offer competitive solution in the neighborhood. You have had a lot of experience with China and Chinese wrath, so maybe you thought also about those issues.
Thank you. Probably I won't be able to avoid now this question till the end of my term, and maybe even a bit longer. You know, I've tried to imagine, or remember at least, the time, let's say 5 years ago, and what was our approach, well, European or even global approach to China. Did we check for investments? Did we see, as in any case, threatening whenever they, you know, build bridges, railways, ports, 5G equipment, or something like that? I would say probably not so much. But during the last 5 years, and I probably would say that it started with sanctioning Australia and COVID, that actually we started understanding what it is China these days. That it can be aggressive, it can be persistent, it will use whatever instrument it has in its power in order to change the course of other countries. You know, and they can be near, and then as the Lithuanian case showed, they can be further away. For them, it doesn't matter. And I think that the last point in this on this path was Russian invasion in Ukraine. And now we actually live in different reality. I see way much more suspicion among the European countries, among the Western countries, or even what is called usually the global alliance when it comes to China, when it comes to China's assertiveness, military, economic. And I think a lot of us are starting to wake up to this new reality, that it's not just Russia attacking Ukraine. This is actually something, it possibly way bigger as being challenged. This is global security architecture. And if it falls down, if it were to fall down in Ukraine, then all of the other actors that depend on it would be in danger. And this is, I would say that is a very timely awakening. The only problem is that it is being paid for with Ukrainian blood. But we are awakening. And I think that now when we awaken, this global alliance, when it awakens, is to make sure that the global security architecture is defended, strengthened, and ensure that it will last for at least as much as it has lasted. That's the first point. The second point is, you know, there was I would say, very important debate happening in European Union, and it was, you know, I would nickname it strategic autonomy. There were different approaches to it. There were different opinions about it, but I think it was useful and needed. Lithuania supported part of it, more of an economic part of it, not maybe the security part. We do not believe, and we have not believed that NATO has an alternative in any case, and I think that this war in Ukraine shows it. But it is very important now, if we want to be taken seriously when it comes to our future debate about strategic autonomy, about European role as a geopolitical actor, that we need to be very serious about what we do in Ukraine, and going back to the first question, in the Eastern Partnership, and maybe to partnership in a broader sense. Because this is where we are being tested as a geopolitical actor. Now, when I see the numbers of how much equipment is being provided to Ukraine by United States, how much financial assistance is being provided by United States, unfortunately, I have to say, well, fortunately and unfortunately, I have to say that this is still, the security provider is still the United States. It's a transatlantic partner that is still here to provide the security. If we want to be taken seriously when we talk about the security architecture of the European continent that is provided by the European Union or by ourselves, and we need to step up when it comes to Ukraine, and also I would say politically in the broader region. That was partly covered by me and partly covered by other colleagues here in the panel.
Thank you very much. Following on that, one region that is particularly vulnerable in the neighborhood is Western Balkans. It's vulnerable to Russian influence, to Chinese influence. It still does have the European perspective, but do you think that we could do something more, Minister Albert?
Definitely, it's a region that is very vulnerable. It's vulnerable because Russia has all ties in that region, and they know how to pull the string, and it can be vulnerable if they get frustrated. I'm very happy to see that Albania, Northern Macedonia are advancing in their relation with us. But it's the whole region that we must tackle. And we must be very clear with them about the future that is waiting for them within our European family. We must help them also in their efforts. And we must, first of all, acknowledge all the efforts that they are doing, and we must help them, because all the effort they are doing is to join our family, to share our values, to be up to the standards that we want to meet, and therefore they are moving away from that other influence that deny the European model. So definitely the path that has been started with Northern Macedonia and Albania very recently must not be stopped, and we must keep up on that pace.
Thank you very much. Moving a little bit further to Moldova, which is your neighbor, and in general to those countries that were offered a candidate status, of course Ukraine as well. Do you think that we are acting quickly enough, that it is a real perspective for membership that is helping them? Or are they being just put in a waiting room with a nice name? And what can we do more in this context?
Well, I definitely hope that this is not a waiting room, because I think these countries do deserve this candidate status and European perspective. Today we met the foreign ministers of Ukraine, of the Republic of Moldova and of Georgia all together, and the atmosphere was great because it was the first meeting after the historic decision of the European Council in June. And the word which was on everybody's lips, in fact there were two words, one was reform and the other one was support for reform. And I think this is what we need to do right now. We have to support these countries in order to fulfill those benchmarks which were included in the 17th of June opinion of the Commission, opinions of the Commission, which recommended the granting of candidate status. For Moldova itself, it is very important since this objective gives a goal, and this is valid for Ukraine as well, gives a goal to the country. The country has already a very committed leadership, a president, a government, and a parliament which are pro-democratic reforms, which are willing to perform in that direction, to perform the reform of the justice system, of the public administration, of the economy, and the conditions for investors and so on. And I think this goal provides also the possibility for having a rhythm for reforms. And what we need to do is to help. Of course, Moldova is very vulnerable because it is the most exposed neighbor of Ukraine to the impact of the crisis in Ukraine. It has multiple crises which are going on at the same time. There is a crisis of energy, and we have discussed today about the challenges of heavy dependence from Russian sources and from electricity from Transnistria, the separatist province of the Republic of Moldova. There is a crisis resulting from the effort to support the humanitarian assistance for the refugees. They have the largest number of refugees per capita among the neighbors of Ukraine. There is an economic crisis because of the effects of the war and the loss of various markets for their products, and the social assistance effort for the citizens. Basically, the economy is not going too well, And for instance, the inflation is perhaps the largest in Europe. It's almost 32% or even more now as we speak. So they need support, and that's why we have created Romania, Germany, and France an initiative which is called the Moldova Support Platform. The first meeting of the platform took place at the beginning of April in Berlin. The second one in July, on the 15th of July in Bucharest. And the third one should take place by the end of the year in Paris. And the target of this instrument is to, on one hand, gather assistance, financial assistance, and the Moldovan government needs grants, so direct financial assistance for their economy. And we managed to gather 660 million euros in Berlin and 615 million euros in Bucharest. And we will continue. And on the other hand, to support the reform process which is needed in order for the benchmarks provided in the 17th of June opinion of the Commission to be achieved, to be fulfilled. So assistance for reforms, assistance for the financial effort of the country, all these are needed and are needed now.
Thank you very much. You picked on a very important topic, which is the economy, the economic situation in both in our countries, which is not so good, but that's not what we are supposed to talk about. But the economic situation in a wider neighborhood. And I would like to ask Minister Stewart how to strengthen economically those countries and make them closer to us in this sense.
Well, thank you. I think I touched earlier on free trade agreements with Georgia, Moldova, trying to make sure that they're incorporated into our economic systems. And we must make sure, going back to the issues around strategic autonomy, that we don't learn the wrong lessons, because we'll never, even within the EU, going to be able to do everything for ourselves. So what our vision would be very much for a network of liberty around the world, with free trade, with open trading systems, avoiding in the eventuality of things like pandemics and other global crises, that the knee-jerk reaction isn't to freeze, put export bans in place, because actually you exacerbate rather than improve the situation. So I think while we think deeply and accept the change that I think the invasion of Ukraine has triggered in us all, looking at China and other autocratic states around the world, what we mustn't do is end up building barriers, least of all between democratic countries, and least of all excluding the weakest countries who need to see opportunity. And not every part of the world, not every country will see that opportunity as being able to join the EU, which can be a positive force for reform in the Eastern neighbourhood. But what we've got to do is make sure that we do have a network of liberty around the world, that we recognise the autocratic threats, that we stand up for our values, and that we're inclusive in a global trading system, and that we don't move away because of our disappointment about the way certain actors have behaved within the previous global system, that we don't move to a world in which everyone sits behind the walls of their blocks.
Thank you very much. And probably the last question in our panel goes to Minister Haavisto, and it concerns disinformation that is being spread by our enemies in the countries around us. It's about us. It's about the whole international system. It's the way it works or it doesn't work. Why is this disinformation so attractive to some, and why aren't we more active in countering it?
Thank you, Veronica. This is an excellent question, and of course, before going to all those who from outside are influencing to us, we just have to refer to our own COVID-19 debates, for example, in our own country, with all that amount of disinformation. And following the US debates on these issues and others, I think we really should get concerned. I at least had always believed that people are more educated, have more schools, good quality education, have through the computers access to all kinds of information, and we see how attractive the nonsense is even in the computer world and in the internet and so forth. And I think that's a real tragedy, and it's a real question, how do we influence and how, for example, young people learn to choose the right information channels and reliable information channels, and that's of course a big question. But then of course we are influenced systematically by Russian information, Chinese information, other information sources, and I think we were dreaming about this global internet network, and now what we see is actually localized internet with their own rules in China, internet with own rules in Russia and so forth. So we are living in some kind of interesting moment of anti-globalization, actually, that we have to get together between the democratic countries and those forces who want to defend the free media and so forth. And maybe looking this in the perspective of Ukraine and the Russian attack against Ukraine, I think it's so important that we support currently also the free media that is working with the Russian language, those Russian journalists who probably cannot work anymore in their own country, but hopefully can work in the European Union. In Finland, we have, for example, had a very good experience that we have our national broadcasting companies sending news already for many years in Russian language because of the Russian minority living in Finland. But actually, we have noticed that also the Russian media is sometimes, time to time, picking the Finnish source in Russian language. Some journalists in St. Petersburg have been saying that they cannot publish themselves something, but when they can pick a Finnish news, they can refer to those channels. And I think that kind of work we really have to do, and we have to do very systematically to get our information through.
Thank you very much. This is an excellent end, excellent last take to the discussion, which I would like to summarize very quickly. It's difficult to summarize everything that was said, but I think there was not much disagreement in what the distinguished panelists said. I think first point is that we should engage with countries in our wider neighborhood. We should fight the disinformation that is there. We should offer them perspective and for our own counter-narrative. Second point that came out of the discussion is that we should strengthen our own security, both through strengthening EU-NATO ties and through strengthening the European defenses. This is a point without which we cannot continue. And the third point was to offer economic stability and security to those countries around us. I hope we will be able to do all 3 points, and for next year when we meet, we won't need to discuss whether to defeat Russia or not, because Russia will be defeated. Thank you very much.
Thank you.